Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the House of Bloodstein, Mentralysis, Chapter 9, Awake. And surprise, as Awake is barely 1 1/4 pages long, we will proceed straight away to Part 3, Chapter 10, which is on Hoban. And then after that, there is only 1 chapter to go, and we're done. We will be done with the entire Bloodstein series. Previously, Kay concluded his battle with Queen Ghome, got the artifacts of Vilhelm around her head and around her neck. She went unconscious, and as he waited for her to revive, he assisted his staff, repairing them with the no-berry dust and the water, clearing them of their hypnosis and their shadow tech poisoning. Kay's not going to let his staff die, even though they're red shirts, they're secondary characters, third characters, however you want to refer to them. He refused to let them go, and then figured out that Queen Ghome had hidden herself amongst her attendants, had switched parts after she fled into the underground sections of the enclosure. Very cagey specimen Queen Ghome is. So, as they figured out which one was Queen Ghome, her attendants, who pretended to be servile and compliant, were actually passing around a pot of aboleth powder and rearmed with it, and they whipped Leica's butt. They blew one of her legs off, blew one of her arms off, and they also kicked Kay's butt, knocking him down to the ground because he wasn't expecting it. They destroyed his Shadow Tech helmet, stuffed Creeper down the hole, and his gifts went dark. And just as they were about to finish him off, the newly repaired staff came to his aid and took the attendants down. Then the dead started falling from the sky as Queen Ghome, before Kay got the artifacts around her, had pressed this button on this controller. Nothing happened. She threw it at him. What it did was it summoned the dead from the sky. They basically came down from orbit like shooting stars, hitting the enclosure with pinpoint accuracy. And there were dead guys everywhere. And if you recall from the previous book, just one dead guy was enough to create complete havoc. But using his knowledge from the previous battle, Kay knew what their weak point is, the tanks at their back, with the wretched fluids that it's pumping into them. He targeted those tanks and defeated the dead guy much more easily. But then a whole bunch more dead guys showed up. And he's like, wow, well, now what are we going to do? But fortunately, Leica, repaired by the staff, came to his aid, and Queen Ghome's Bower chest restarted, and surprisingly fought on Kay's side and wiped the dead from the premises. Out came Philip, Thomasina, Clara Wonderluck King, and a now revived Queen Ghome, who, wearing the headset and the necklace, is actually Rothabah of George, her sleeping self, who now has control over her body. And she commanded the Bower chest to fight for Kay, fight and destroy the dead. So that's where we were. Now we continue Part 3, Chapter 9, Awake. And this won't take more than a minute. Let's do this. Kay? When Kay opened his eyes, he was in a bed in a sterile white room. The lights all dimmed. Machines bleeped all around him. Sam was sitting by his bedside, holding his hand. Her face was haggard with care, her black eyes cloudy and exhausted. Kay saw a number of fine scars marring her skin. A plate of cold food sat on a nearby table, uneaten. "Sam!" Kay cried, sitting up. She gently but firmly moved him back down to his pillow. "Sam, are you all right? Where are we? When did—" "Shh, Sala," she said in Anui meaning. "Shh, we're on Hoban," she said in a tired voice, gently pressing her fingers to his lips. "You're safe, Sala Erendan." Kay noticed her beautiful hands were bruised, knuckles skinned. "Sam, what happened to your hands?" "I'm fine, darling. Don't worry about me. I've been waiting for you to wake up. I've not left your side since I returned. I've not eaten or slept. I would not leave you." She stood. She was wearing odd clothing, a black leather suit stitched together with metal plates. She had on a tunic of similar construction, along with a pair of stout boots. Are you wearing armor, Sam?" he asked. Kay also noticed a few streaks of gray hair mixed into her mane of coal black. "Just some clothes they gave me to wear." Sam went to a nearby door and peered outside. Someone huge was standing there in the hallway. Sam opened it a crack. "Jarl Khan," came a soft voice from outside. "It's all right," Sam replied. "You may go. I want to be alone with my husband." Sam shut the door and locked it. She returned to the bed and began undressing. She shed her boots and set them aside. She undid the complicated straps and fasteners and removed her leather tunic. "Sam," Kay cried, you're back." Her pale body was covered with welts and bruises. "It's nothing, darling. The hospitaller said I might be bruised up for a while." She stepped out of her pants and folded them on a chair. She slid into bed with Kay, nude. She took him into her arms. It was like paradise, feeling the warmth and strength of her body next to his. "How I've longed to hold you again, my love," she whispered. He felt tears stream down her cheek. Her warm body spasmed a bit. Sam was weeping. "I'm fine, Sam. How long have I been out? Did the hospitallers take care of the creeper spores?" Sam answered in Anui, but she used words he wasn't familiar with. "Sam, the hospitallers fixed you. They fixed you," she said. And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 9, Awake. Very short, as I promised. With this chapter, I wanted to introduce some seeds of doubt as to what actually happened in this book. That just maybe it was Sam who was doing the adventuring and Kay was removed of his parts in a capsule on Hoban. That was my intention, just to throw in a few seeds of uncertainty as to what actually happened. You have to be careful when you're an author. Once a book is published, the author is basically a spectator, a reader, just like the audience is. It doesn't matter that the author wrote the book. Once it's in the public spectrum, that's it. You can't go and make grand pronouncements after publication like some authors do. Isn't that right, Joe Rowling? Where you blow with the popular winds and try to retcon your own book after the fact. You can't really do that. I mean, because at that point, unless you create a new edition with changes, the book is what it is, and you can't just make a grand statement. So with this chapter, I wanted to create a little bit of doubt as to what happened. Is it possible that it was Sam doing the adventuring and Kay was in a capsule on Hoban with everybody else? There's really no evidence in the book elsewhere that I can think of to support that. And it could be in this chapter Sam was just bruised up from her reconstruction process from the damage Queen Ghome had inflicted on her part. Being a monoma, her body reacts differently than everyone else's. Or maybe the fantastical adventure that Sarah had locked Sam into had real world effects on her body, and she was bruised up from the RDP that Sarah had created for her. Hard to say, and I have my theories, but again, even though I created all this, I'm just at this point a reader, a spectator, just like the audience is, and my opinions only mean so much. I can think and I can know things, and they're not really relevant if you can't find evidence for them in the book. Then they mean nothing. Right, Joe? Anywho, that was Chapter 9, Awake. And now, let's proceed straight away to Part 3, Chapter 10, on Hoban. Kay and Sam entered the recovery room lined with sterile beds. Occupying the beds were several staff girls from the kitchen they had rescued from their faceless slumber. The Nobury dust used to put them back together was truly remarkable. They all rested as if nothing had happened to them. According to the hospitallers, Sam was the most difficult to repair, her monoma physiology making the repair tough. At the end of the row was Sarah, a bandage covering her eyes. The hospitallers had learned much regarding Nobury and its proper use. They had rebuilt Sarah's destroyed eyes with delicate care, and she seemed to be responding well. However, her demeanor as a recovering patient was not good. She brooded in her bed, was surly, and looking for people to feel sorry for her. Rawl had come to visit her many times, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Towering over her bedside, Leica was conflicted and struggling with something internally. She eventually pulled Kay and Sam aside and announced, "Leica will not pound Sarah until Sarah can see." "That's very kind of you," Kay replied. Sarah will appreciate that. One thing to consider, though, before you pound her, it's not Sarah you've beef with, it's Ultra Sarah. The sleeping Sarah. The awake Sarah's done nothing to you yet. Leica frowned and grappled with the thought. As for Kay himself, he was out of danger. The creeper spores gone from his head, but the ordeal he had been through had done considerable damage to his gifts. He could still waft and cloak as always, and he could see far with his dark sight, but his ability to see into the past and the future was greatly reduced. He could only sight a few seconds into the future and a few minutes into the past, just like his father, Captain Davidge. He could also no longer interact with objects in the past or future. Rawl thought the damage would heal in time. Perhaps he would get those abilities back someday, perhaps with therapy. For now, his dark sight was greatly diminished. One of the staff girls stirred. The Hospitallers gathered around her bed to tend to her. Rawl and Jana Del Levy came in. Lord Blanchford? Nee Countess? Yes. Could you please come with us? Kay and Sam came away with him out into the hallway. Everyone seems to be doing well, he remarked. Yes, Rawl said. We are most pleased. How's Sarah? Repaired and healing. Though with her MC deviation, her WS seems to be much angrier, less sophisticated than her Ultra SS. Kay laughed. Well, he might be correct. Where's the urn? Safe here with us, where it will receive proper study. We are hopeful it will lead to great things. They led Kay and Sam down the hallway past several doors. Through here, please, sir, Yana mentioned. Kay went in. Inside was a quiet IU tended by several Hospitallers. In one bed littered with scanners was the tiny form of Kai's son, Sebastian, fully reassembled. He was kicking and squirming a little under his knitted blanket. The scanners indicated a strong heartbeat and good lungs. Kai's son was going to grow into a strong young man. In the next bed, surrounded by a host of blinking screens and hissing machines, was Kai. Tweeter sat by her head. Kay came up and leaned over her. She seemed whole, but somewhat deflated. Tubes were thrust down her throat. The Hospitallers, not knowing her tomboyish nature, had painted her fingernails a cheery red color. They had also curled her wind-blown hair, creating a tangled nest of frizzy brown hair around her face. It was surreal seeing her with red fingernails and curled hair. She would not be happy when she woke up. That should be something to see. Tweeter seemed uncharacteristically quiet and dour. He was normally a little bundle of energy. Did you reattach everything with the dust? Kay asked. We did, Jana answered. But what? Rawl spoke. She didn't wake up, Lord Blanchford. The second gaming session was too much. It would have been too much for anybody. As I said, Rawl began some sort of I told you so speech, but silenced himself. What was the point? Sam covered her mouth. Kay stared down in horror at the machines and Kai's beautiful curly-haired face. What are you saying? Jana swallowed and nervously adjusted the folds of her Jones dress. Her readings are flat, Lord Blanchford. She's gone. It's merely the machines keeping her alive. She has no brain function. Kay glanced at the nearby squirming form of Kai's son, and then at the bulk of his mother's vacant body next to him, lit partially in Tweeter's dim light. What would he say to his father and mother when they returned to the League, that their dear friend over 30 years was dead? He envisioned a brief glimpse of himself and Sam standing before Sebastian in the grove one day, having to explain to him what happened to his mother, trying to make him understand how brave she had been, and why she was gone. Jana held out a slip of paper. She was holding this in her hand. She must have written it before the gaming session was started. Kay took the paper. Tell my son what his mother did for him without hesitation. Kay closed his eyes. Sam's hand came with his. He felt silent loss. For her son, who would never know his mother, and for himself, who had just lost a mentor and a friend. Ever since he was a little boy, there was Kai sitting at the table, arguing with his mother, playing with him in the grove, teaching him how to drink and fight dirty. His first childhood crush, dead. He looked ahead to the future with his damaged sight and saw nothing. His eyes stung. He wiped them. Sam embraced him, gently cooing in his ear. knowing the pain he was in. "I should never have allowed her to do this," he said. "I should have told you not to do it," Rawl answered. "But then Ghome would have escaped. All would still be in their capsules, faceless, locked in an RDP. Magistrate Kylus knew what she was doing, and she accepted it." Jana tried to rationalize it away. "She was a very brave woman." Kay pulled up a chair and seated himself next to her, while Sam stood over him. He took Kai's flaccid hands, so soft, so yielding, with painted fingernails. Nothing like Kai in the least. He remembered those same hands balled up into fists, bouncing them off his face in the village. What a memory. Fighting Kai in a bar, slugging her in the face, rolling around with her on the floor, and then dancing around the fire that night on Onaris. So many memories. His entire life with Kai, now just a memory. "We have contacted her husband," Jana said. "He is on his way. When he arrives, we shall go over with him what has happened, and he shall decide what is to be done with her. We can continue her care for as long as he likes, or we can end it and give her peace. Her bravery and her contribution to our leader's rebirth shall not be forgotten here on the Gold Coast. Hers shall be an honored memory." "Thank you," Kay said. "I would like to sit with her for a bit and say my piece." Rawl and Jana backed away. "Of course. The others will sleep through the night. In the morning they shall rise and remember nothing." "I'm certain you'll wish to be there for that," Rawl said. Yes, thank you." Kay wished they would go. He wanted to be alone with Kai. They walked out and the door swung shut. Sam whispered in his ear, "Are you all right, love?" "No, Sam." Kay and Sam sat with her all night long, listening to the hiss of the machines and the occasional gurgle from her son sleeping nearby. Tweeter didn't move. Kay wondered about Pendar Tower, at the empty rooms and her vacant office in the village, and the Cat God pub, her bar. He wondered what the place would be like without her. Kay absently rubbed Tweeter's beak. He hopped into Kay's hand. "You okay, brother?" Kay asked. Tweeter was in mourning. He seemed to understand that Kai was gone. Kay and Sam strolled the grounds around the Hospitaller sanctum. They had both quickly regained their strength. Her bruises were fading. Her scarring was also disappearing a little bit more every day. The Hospitallers filed her nails down and even cut her hair to a Vith length, ending at the small of her back. It was odd seeing her without her hair spilling down to her ankles. They both were eager to return to Cana, finish their jar, and have their first batch of children. Children, new, vibrant life, would symbolically put an end to this episode, but the Hospitallers wanted to continue examining them both for a few more days, just to make certain their conditions were stable. So far, they appeared to be so. Philip and Thomasina were gone, off to Wham, for Philip to acclimatize to his new home. Sarah was still mad at them for eloping. Sarah went on and on about the Gellertron at Castle Blanchford, how she wanted to locate and reactivate it and create a gateway to Wham, so Philip and Thomasina could come and go as they pleased. Sarah was not willing to let go of her brother. Kay, though, wanted nothing to do with Wham and Wilhela Cormant Grant, to whom he owed his allegiance, though without her shadow tech, he and Leica would have never survived. He dreaded when she would come calling. Sarah felt like walking today to test out her improving vision. She wore a pair of goggles to blot out the strong Hoban sun. "These are kinda cool," she said to Sam, the gears within clicking. She knew nothing of the impressive feats Ultra Sarah had accomplished while she was asleep. The Hospitallers advised against telling her for the time being. Might be too much of a shock. Give her some time. Certainly there would be no living with her once she knew. King sat on Sarah's shoulder, quietly protective of her. However, Ultra Sarah was not gone. Kay and Sam saw her hologram every night, gliding about the Hospitaller sanctum when Sarah was asleep. As soon as the lights went out, there was Ultra Sarah wanting to be sociable. "Hey, you guys, you asleep or something? Let's get a game going." Sam loved Ultra Sarah, found her to be fun, yet classy and sophisticated. She soon preferred Ultra Sarah over Awake Sarah. One evening, Kay saw her knocking on Rawl's door. The door opened. She winked at him and went in. "So that Rawl guy asked if I'd like to have dinner with him or something this evening," Sarah said, fiddling with her goggles. "And what did you say, Sarah?" Sam asked. "I said get bent. Why in the name of creation would I want to have dinner with a creepy Hospitaller who just got done putting my face back together? The guy finger paints and body fluids. Well, who knows, Sarah? You might like him, Kay said. No fraggin' way! They rounded the bend, Sarah chattering on about nothing as usual, playing with her goggles. There, sitting in the field on a flower-strewn dice, surrounded by hospitallers, was Rothuba, wearing a fiery jeweled gown. The golden necklace created by Wilhelm of Wham hung from her neck. The headset sat on her head of regal honey blonde hair. No more hologram. A real flesh-and-blood woman sat there. The hospitallers had made use of the parts of Lady Chrysania that Philip had carried and protected through the Gellertron, reattaching them to her body. She was very beautiful, a warm, smiling woman, restored to how she was thousands of years ago. Her followers from all over came to sit in attendance with her every day. Standing at her side was Leica, armor gone, wearing a comfortable tunic, a single long sword, and the DD rifle Kay had given to her holstered at her back. Leica gave Kay plenty of distance now that Sam was back, spending most of her time with Rothuba, and her inscrutable face betrayed nothing of what she was feeling within, though occasionally Kay caught her gazing at him from afar. Kay tried to include her in their daily activities. He went out of his way to make her feel welcome, but she seemed shy and distant, content to stand at her mother's side. One evening, Kay wrote a long letter to Leica and gave it to King to deliver to her. Using his sight, he saw her sitting in her room wearing a shirt from Carahill's store, reading it. The next night, when all were asleep, Kay met her out in the fields and finally made good on his promise to wrestle with her. They wrestled all night long. Sarah wanted to run over and say hello to Rothuba, but she kept trying to cut the line ahead of the other people waiting to see her. Cutting in line is quite rude, Lady Sarah, King said. Oh, come off it, she said. She's our buddy. Kay laughed. Come on, Sarah, clear her some space, will you? Let's go see Sebastian, Sarah cried. King, where's Sebastian? Around the bend. Let's go. Bursting with smiles, they rounded another corner of the sanctum. There, under a shade tree, was Sebastian, playing rough with one of the staff girls on a blanket. Several people sat in the shade watching. They came up. So how you doing, you old git? Sarah asked in her loud voice. She adjusted her goggles a little in the shade. Who's an old git? Came an answer. Sitting near the edge of the blanket was the professor. He had shed his usual scholarly aloofness, watching his son with pride. Sitting next to him in a robe and slippers was Kai, a little heavy-lidded and weary, but very much sound and alive. Tweeter, back to his old self, bounced at her shoulder, surging with energy. She was wearing a weighty necklace. It stuck out through the folds of her robe, and a headset similar to Rothuba's, the antenna rising up through the brownish-blonde mass of her curled hair, though it was constructed in a much more utilitarian hospitaller style. It wasn't pretty, like the ones hanging around Rothuba's neck. The professor had the hollow plans for it sitting in front of him. He had been going over every circuit and subsystem, pasting it into his brain. He fussed with the headset every so often, resituating it on her head. He already had various ideas on how to improve the design, to minimize it, possibly internalize it, and add redundancy. Redundancy was critical. Still a crabhead, Kai pushed his hands away when she got tired of him. Let me be, will ya? She'd say. They had all gathered around Kai's bed, watching the monitor, seeing her grow thin and pale in the sterile light of her room. When the professor arrived, he was beside himself. After contemplating, he decided to remove Kai from the machines, let her pass, and then take her home to wild Onaris, where she could be buried and her family plot in the sun by the sea. But, as they unhooked the machines and wheeled them away, Rahl made a critical discovery. While her waking self had died due to the rigors of the second gaming session, her sleeping self still lived, faint, barely readable on the scanners, but present nonetheless. They brought in the latest Mentralysis deck, hooked her up, and there she was, Kai's sleeping self, her voice loud and grumpy. The Hospitallers copied Wilhelm's necklace and headset from the originals and created a second set. When they placed the device on her head, she opened her eyes and lived again. The first thing she did was bitch about her painted nails and throw a fit over her curled hair. She was ready to fight somebody. It was good to have her back. Elated, the professor began preparations to wire Castle Blanchford and the village for Kai's use, and the best Mentralysis decks were to be sent there without delay, installed by Rahl's team. After analysis, the Hospitallers determined Kai was an MC, or moderate change archetype, which is one of the more mild types with no differences in her personality that could be readily detected. She was still the same loud, crabby person, which is just what they all needed. They would have Kai no other way. She was just too ornery to die. "I can't get these damn curls out of my hair," Kai said, pawing at her curly locks with disgust. "If my sister saw this, it'd give me no peace. I'd have to fight every one of them. I'm probably going to have to cut them off or something. Who told the Hospitallers to curl my hair?" "Nobody. They did it on their own," Kay said. "They thought it made you look pretty. When we get home, see Lady Kylos, and she might be able to tease the curls out without you having to chop your hair off. She is a sorceress when it comes to hair. I swore she'd never get me in that ruddy chair of hers. Well, I just have to bob this mess down and be done with it," Kai said. "It'll grow back. In fact, we all used to sell our hair for money when I was a kid. Somebody was buying, I don't know who, but somebody did. Did I ever tell you that?" "No, Kai," Kay said. She laughed. "Oh, you know what? The Hospitaller said they named this condition after me. They're calling it the Kylos syndrome." She gave the professor a sharp elbow. "Hear that, hun? They named a horrible brain condition after me. How about that?" She stood up and stretched. "Okay, Sebastian, you ready for your mom?" She stepped out of her slippers and got down on the blanket with her son, roughly rolling around with him. Sebastian had her mother's pugnacious spirit. He grabbed her around the neck. Her Mentralysis headset went ajar as they wrestled. They all watched with nervous anticipation, ready to dive in and save her should she need it. Hey, Kai," Sarah said, removing her duster and goggles. "Look, you should rest. I'll fight with him, okay?" "Will you people relax?" she said, resituating the headset. "I can feel the tension with you guys. It's gonna be okay, I promise. Look, if I can't sit in the sun with my husband, if I can't enjoy the company of my friends, and if I can't wrestle around with my son, then I'd rather be dead. If I'm gonna live, I'm gonna live." They seated themselves and watched Kai for the rest of the afternoon. The technology keeping her alive seemed sound and durable. For Kay, seeing Kai as a doting mother, Sam whole, Sarah whole, and well, brought this ordeal to an end. And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 10 on Hoban. And once again, I apologize for all the noise in the background. My wife was on vacation, was sitting here, and the dogs were here, and they were playing, and my wife wouldn't stay quiet, yada, yada, yada. The things you do sometimes. I don't have a sound stage or anything. I'm just sitting here at my desk in my office, our couch, and my wife is sitting on the couch drinking a coffee, spilling her coffee on my couch. Dogs all over the place. Yeah, anyways. So we tie up a lot of loose ends. Kai died, and that was always my intention, that Kai would die, but then I just couldn't bring myself to kill her off. Kai's been around since book 1, and I never like it when authors just kill a character for no good reason. Some authors make it a highlight of their books, seeing who's going to die next, but I don't like that. You know, if you're a reader and you invest the time and the headspace and the energy to relate to a character, and this having the author kill them off for no good reason never rang true with me. So I thought with all this Mentralysis stuff, maybe she gets to live, like the second self gets to live. And the book I'm working on now, called The Woman Behind the Wall, which deals with Sebastian, Kai's son, we see Kai, and she is a little bit different than before. She's not as much of a drinker. She's not quite as pugnacious, a little more doting than Kai was previously, but that's a whole different book. We also see that after Sam showed back up, Leica retreated, gave Kay some space. In my thoughts going forward, I thought that Leica would be allowed to stay at Castle Blanchford after her service to Rothaba either came to an end or she was allowed a little bit more roam, and that Leica lived in a bell tower in Castle Blanchford, refurbished, very nice, and that she actually took up with Kay's brother, Mazer. We never really see a whole lot of Mazer, but because he's still just a kid. But I always thought that she would take up with him, and as the years would pass by, starts to get old. Her hair turns gray, and her skin starts to wrinkle up a little bit. But that was my plan, that Leica would still be around, but with his brother, Mazer. Well, that hasn't really come to fruition yet. That was just my thoughts. We see the awake Sarah really doesn't like Rawl too much, but the sleeping self of Sarah just is continuing to hang out with Rawl, and it was my intention in future books that the sleeping Sarah would marry Rawl, but the awake Sarah was not. So only when she's asleep is she his wife, basically. I'm still sorting that out. Those are just my initial thoughts. So next week we conclude the House of Bloodstein Mentralysis with Part 3, Chapter 11, The Tower of 100 Spires. And then that's it. And that is the end of the book. So we will knock that out next week. And I really don't know what book I'm going to read after this. I don't want to read my whole repertoire. I got to have something out there. I got to make a buck somehow. But we'll see. I was thinking maybe I'd do the Temple, the Exploding Head trilogy. I love that trilogy. It's 3 books. But it's one of my most favorite things. I don't know. We'll see. Anywho, until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.